My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, and I've been thinking about something lately that I didn't understand for most of my life. I remember the arguments. Of course I do. The raised voices, the slammed doors, the way my husband's face would turn red when he was angry, the way my own voice would shake when I tried to defend myself. But that's not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was the silence, the kind that came after, the kind that filled the rooms between us like something heavy you couldn't move, the kind that made the house feel bigger than it was. I've been divorced now for 23 years, and for a long time, I thought the worst part of that marriage was the fighting. I told myself that. I told my sister that. I told my daughter that when she was old enough to ask why her father and I didn't live together anymore. I said we fought too much, that we couldn't get along, that some people just aren't meant to be together. And that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. We got married young. I was 22. He was 24. It was 1973. We had a small wedding in my parents' backyard. I wore a dress my mother helped me sew. He wore a suit his father lent him. Everyone said we looked happy, and we were not at first. But somewhere along the way, I don't know when exactly we stopped talking to each other the way we used to. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, like a door closing 1 inch at a time, until you don't even notice it's shut. We still talked, of course. We talked about bills, about what to make for dinner, about whose turn it was to pick up our daughter from school. But we stopped talking about things that mattered. I stopped telling him when I was sad. He stopped telling me when he was overwhelmed. I stopped asking him what he was thinking. He stopped asking me how I really was. And when we did fight, which we did, more and more as the years went on, it was never about what was actually wrong. It was about the dishes, about being late, about forgetting to call, about small things that stood in for all the big things we didn't know how to say. I remember one argument in particular. It was a Saturday morning. Our daughter was maybe 8 or 9. She was watching cartoons in the living room. He and I were in the kitchen. I don't even remember what started it. Something about grocery shopping, I think. Something small. But it escalated the way it always did. I said something sharp. He said something sharper. I raised my voice. He raised his. And then nothing. He walked out of the room. I stayed in the kitchen, shaking, staring at the counter. And the silence came in. It sat between us for the rest of that day. Through lunch, through dinner, through the evening. We didn't speak. We moved around each other like strangers sharing space. Our daughter didn't say anything either. She just got quieter. She went to her room earlier than usual. And I remember standing at the sink that night, washing dishes, thinking, this is fine. This will pass. We just need some time. But it didn't pass. The silence became normal, after a fight. We'd go days without really speaking. We'd exchange the necessary words. I'm going to the store. Dinner's ready. Did you pay the electric bill? But we wouldn't look at each other. We wouldn't touch. We wouldn't sit in the same room unless we had to. And then, eventually, the silence would lift. Not because we talked about what happened. Not because we apologized or worked through it. Just because enough time had passed. We'd start speaking again. We'd move on. We'd pretend it never happened. And I thought that was normal. I thought that was what marriage was. That you fought. You went quiet. You moved on. I didn't realize we were building a wall. One silence at a time. By the time our daughter was in high school, we barely spoke at all. We lived in the same house. We slept in the same bed. We showed up to the same events. But we weren't together. Not really. I remember sitting at her school concerts, him on one side of me. The empty space between us louder than the music. I remember holidays where we smiled for pictures and then didn't speak on the drive home. I remember lying in bed at night, inches away from him, feeling completely alone. And I told myself it was his fault. He was cold. He was distant. He didn't care. But the truth is, I was just as silent as he was. I never told him I felt lonely. I never told him I missed him. I never asked him if he was unhappy too. I just waited for him to say something, for him to fix it, for him to reach across the space we'd built and pull me back. But he didn't, and I didn't either. We separated when I was 51. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big fight, no final argument. We just stopped. One day he said he thought maybe we should live apart for a while, and I said okay. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't tell him I was scared. I just said okay, and he moved out. The divorce was finalized a year later. Our daughter was in college by then. She said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd known for a long time that we weren't happy, and I remember feeling relieved that it was over. I thought, now I can breathe. Now I can start over. And I did, in some ways. I got my own apartment. I started working full-time again. I reconnected with old friends. But the silence didn't leave. It just moved with me. I've lived alone now for over 20 years, and I've gotten used to the quiet. But sometimes, late at night, I think about him. Not the man he became at the end. Not the man I stopped recognizing. But the man he was when we were young. The man who used to hold my hand in the car. The man who used to ask me what I was thinking. And I wonder what would have happened if I had just said something. If I had told him early on that the silence scared me. If I had said, I miss you, when we were still in the same house. If I had asked, are you okay? Instead of assuming he didn't care. I don't know if it would have changed anything. Maybe we still would have ended up apart. But maybe we wouldn't have spent so many years living like ghosts in the same house. I see my daughter now, and she's married. She and her husband fight sometimes. She tells me about it, and I listen. And sometimes I want to tell her what I learned too late, but I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm giving advice. So I just ask her, "Did you talk after?" And sometimes she says yes, and sometimes she says no. And when she says no, I see the same silence I used to live in. And I hope she doesn't wait as long as I did to break it. I'm 74 now, and I've learned that the worst damage doesn't come from the things we say in anger. It comes from the things we don't say at all. The silence is what kills a marriage, not the fighting. The silence, the days you let pass without saying what you feel. The nights you let end without reaching out. The years you let build up between you until you don't even know how to start talking again. I remember the arguments, but I remember the silence more, because the arguments ended. The silence never did. If you've been carrying your own silence, I don't know what to tell you. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. It doesn't get easier the longer you wait. It just gets heavier. Thank you for listening. If this meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you shared it, or just sat with it for a while. Sometimes that's enough.